And I don't even care if anyone calls me a Sally, because I'm a snail and I never gonna fail. And you know what? You're gonna have to bail me out of jail.
You're about to hear a story so shocking, it'll make you question everything you thought you knew about family, trust, and betrayal. Imagine a family who has given everything, love, support, and second chances, only to have it all shattered in an instant. This isn't a fictional tale. It's a real-life tragedy that unfolded behind closed doors. Can you guess what happened when a beloved Hollywood figure's family life turned into a nightmare? Stay with me, because what comes next will leave you questioning the limits of loyalty and the price of silence. I don't care if they call me a Sally. I'm a snail, and I'm never going to fail. You know what? You'll have to bail me out of jail someday, and I'm okay with that. But sometimes, life has a way of turning everything upside down in the blink of an eye, even for someone like legendary filmmaker Rob Reiner. The one place that's supposed to be untouchable, safe, his home, was shattered in an unimaginable way. What happened inside those walls didn't involve an outsider, a burglar, or a stranger. No, it was someone they trusted, someone they loved, and that betrayal would rock their world in ways no one could foresee. For decades, Rob had built his career telling powerful stories about love, family, and connection. These were the themes that resonated most with him, stories that brought people together and made them reflect on the importance of those bonds. Yet behind the scenes, his own family was silently unraveling. Rob's son, Nick Reiner, had long struggled with personal demons. These struggles were deep, intense, and slowly started to erode the foundation of the family that everyone believed was so solid. What no one could have imagined was how badly things would escalate, not until the night before everything came crashing down. Nick had been through so much in his life, yet it wasn't until this pivotal moment, the night of December 13th, 2025, that the storm inside him finally broke. "I'm telling you, this is totally falsified in every way," Nick had declared, his voice sharp, filled with defiance, as if trying to convince not only others but himself. But in the aftermath of the tragedy, investigators began to revisit Nick's words, looking back at statements he'd made about his father over the years. At the time, they may have seemed like passing comments, but now, in the wake of the unimaginable, they felt chillingly prophetic. These weren't just casual remarks. They were warning signs, subtle clues to the deep-seated tension that had been simmering just beneath the surface for years, silently building, waiting for the moment to explode. That night, everything changed. What was supposed to be a joyous evening, filled with the warmth of family and the sparkle of the season, took a dark turn. Rob and Michelle had attended a Christmas party hosted by Conan O'Brien, surrounded by friends, familiar faces, and all the laughter and joy that come with the holiday season. The house was alive with the twinkling lights of the festivities, and music filled the air, but beneath the cheerful atmosphere, something felt undeniably wrong. It wasn't just the music or the decorations that should have brought them comfort. There was an underlying tension, an unspoken heaviness in the air that no one could put a finger on, but that everyone could feel. Guests later recalled the abrupt shift that took place during the evening. It wasn't just a minor disagreement, it was an explosion of emotion. An argument, loud and heated, erupted between Rob and Nick. This wasn't the kind of quiet, whispered disagreement you might expect to see in a corner of a room. No, this was different. It was impossible to ignore. The once lively atmosphere at the party shifted dramatically, becoming tense and uncomfortable. It was as if a storm had suddenly descended, and the entire room could feel the change. The chatter died down, and all eyes turned toward the father and son, drawn in by the undeniable intensity of the confrontation. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, their faces betraying their concern. They couldn't help but notice that something wasn't right. One guest later described Nick's behavior as deeply unsettling, something that stuck with them long after the party ended. The memory lingered like a dark cloud over an otherwise bright evening. No one could quite shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air was thick with unease, and it didn't take long for people to realize that this wasn't just an argument. It was something bigger, something much more serious. The evening that had started with laughter and holiday cheer quickly became a turning point, a moment that would shift everything for the Reiner family. The tension between Rob and Nick had been building for years, and this was just the breaking point. What followed would change their lives forever, but no one in that room, not even the closest friends, could have predicted how far that tension would go. The story of Rob and Michelle's family, once so deeply rooted in love and connection, would be shattered by a single catastrophic moment. As the night continued, Rob did not back down. Despite the intensity of the confrontation, he didn't walk away or escalate things further. Instead, he stood firm, facing the situation head-on, trying to steady the storm of emotions around him. Michelle, his constant support and steady presence, stood by him through it all. Together, they tried to maintain a sense of calm, moving as a unit, united in their determination to avoid letting this disagreement explode in front of their friends. They moved carefully, making a deliberate exit when they finally decided to leave. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, just a quiet decision to take control of the situation away from the public eye. To those watching, it appeared as though Rob and Michelle were doing everything they could to protect their family, trying to handle a private issue without drawing more attention to it. Later that night, Rob made a phone call to Eric Idle. The tone of the conversation was completely different, light, upbeat, and focused on future projects, particularly the much-anticipated Spinal Tap sequel. There was no hint of panic in Rob's voice. He sounded motivated, calm, and fully focused on the work ahead, despite the tension from earlier. But beneath that composed exterior, Rob had confided something deeply unsettling to a few close friends. He had admitted to them that he was genuinely scared of his own son. It wasn't anger or frustration that made him say those words. It was fear, the kind of fear a parent feels when they see their child slipping away, trapped in a cycle they can't control. This quiet confession would take on a much deeper meaning later, as the events of that night unfolded with heartbreaking consequences. In the early hours of December 14th, tragedy struck. Rob and Michelle's daughter, Romy, went to their home after repeated attempts to contact them failed. When she entered the house, she immediately knew something was horribly wrong. She quickly called for help. Paramedics and lapped officers rushed to the scene, finding both Rob and Michelle unresponsive. The investigation began swiftly, and the details that emerged were chilling. There were no signs of forced entry. Everything in the house appeared untouched, undisturbed. It was as if whoever had been involved had been welcomed in or was already inside the house. The calm, controlled environment inside the Reiner home spoke volumes. No signs of struggle, no mess, just the quiet, deliberate movements of someone who was familiar with the space. Investigators quickly honed in on Nick, and his movements during the night began to tell a story of their own. He had left the house shortly after the incident, checking into the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica around 4 a.m. His behavior at the hotel appeared completely normal. He checked in without any issues, acting calm, composed, and without any signs of distress. But when investigators searched his hotel room later, they found evidence that tied him directly to the events at the Brentwood home. The evidence pointed to one undeniable fact. Nick was connected to the tragedy in ways that no one could ignore. His calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaos investigators believed had already unfolded. By 9:15 p.m. on December 14th, Nick was located near Exposition Park, just steps from the University of Southern California campus. He didn't resist. He didn't run. He quietly followed the officers' instructions as they took him into custody. As the investigation progressed, the disturbing pattern became clearer. A heated argument, a silent home, a quick disappearance, and a trail that stretched from Brentwood to Santa Monica. The clues began to connect in a way that pointed directly to Nick. In the following days, the full gravity of the situation began to unfold. Forensic teams stepped in to examine the Reiner home. They searched every room, every detail, every inch of the house, trying to understand how and why everything had gone so horribly wrong. What they uncovered only deepened the mystery. Multiple sharp force injuries, inflicted from close range, suggested that this wasn't just an outburst of anger. It was a deliberate, sustained act. Nick was charged with 2 counts of first-degree homicide, one for each of his parents. The evidence pointed to intent. The case quickly escalated into a legal battle of intense magnitude. With special circumstances attached, the consequences became severe. If convicted, Nick faced life in prison without parole or potentially even the death penalty. As Nick faced the judge for the first time, the weight of the charges hit everyone involved. The courtroom was silent, tense, and filled with the kind of gravity that made every word, every gesture, feel like it would define the course of Nick's life. His defense attorney, Alan Jackson, was no ordinary lawyer. He was a heavyweight in the courtroom, known for handling high-profile cases. The stakes were high. The legal battle was only beginning, and the Reiner family's struggle was far from over. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, and the questions surrounding the case, including how Nick could afford such an expensive defense, began to swirl outside the legal arena. With every new revelation, the case grew more complex, with no simple answers to be found. The events surrounding Rob and Michelle Reiner, their family, and their tragic loss would continue to unfold in the coming weeks. For now, the question remained: what truly happened inside that house? Was Nick responsible, or is there more to this story than anyone could ever have imagined? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story insightful, like the video and subscribe for more in-depth analyses of major Hollywood cases. I sometimes come out here just to gather my sick thoughts, Nick had said, his voice sharp and unsettling, cutting through the thick tension that had settled in the room. Despite the storm brewing between them, Rob didn't retreat. He didn't back away from the confrontation. He faced it head-on, determined to steady the chaos, trying to regain some semblance of control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling. Michelle, always his unwavering anchor, stood beside him, her calm presence a quiet, stabilizing force. Together, they formed a united front, refusing to let their private matters unfold in front of everyone. This wasn't just a disagreement, it was a family crisis, and they were determined to protect their family from the brewing storm. As they made their way out of the party, there was no rush, no hurried or dramatic exit. Everything felt deliberate, composed, like parents who had made a conscious decision to handle their family's issues privately, away from prying eyes. To the onlookers, it seemed like a quiet effort to maintain control, to shield their family from a situation that was slipping dangerously beyond their grasp. The decision to leave wasn't out of fear, but out of a protective instinct to guard their family from a conflict that was becoming harder to contain. Later that evening, Rob had a phone call with Eric Idle, and the tone of their conversation couldn't have been more different from what had just transpired. According to Eric, the conversation was lighthearted, filled with optimism and centered around future plans, most notably the much-anticipated Spinal Tap sequel. There was no trace of panic or stress in Rob's voice. He sounded motivated, energized, and focused on the future. He was looking ahead with anticipation, undeterred by the earlier tensions. Yet in the quieter moments before that call, Rob had confided in a few close friends about something deeply unsettling. He admitted in a moment of vulnerability that he was scared of his own son. This wasn't a statement made out of anger or frustration. It came from genuine fear, the kind of fear only a parent can understand, a fear born from watching their child change in ways that are beyond their control. A fear that, in retrospect, would prove to be tragically prophetic. That fear would soon manifest in ways that Rob never could have anticipated. In the early hours of December 14th, everything came crashing down inside the Reiner household. Around 3:30 a.m., their daughter Romy, unable to get in touch with her parents after multiple attempts, decided to check on them in person. When she stepped into the house, she immediately sensed something was horribly wrong. The air was thick with an unsettling quiet, and the house, usually a place of warmth and security, felt eerily still. Her instinct was right. She quickly called for help, her voice trembling with panic. Paramedics and lapped officers rushed to the scene, and what they found left everyone in shock. Rob and Michelle Reiner were both unresponsive, lying in a state that spoke volumes of the tragedy that had unfolded within their home. The investigation was swift and serious. From the moment authorities arrived, they knew they were dealing with a situation that went far beyond a mere medical emergency. They treated it as a potential domestic case, immediately beginning to piece together the puzzle. One crucial detail stood out above all others. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors were intact, the windows untouched, undisturbed. This was not the scene of a break-in. It became painfully clear that whoever was responsible had been inside the house or had been let in willingly. There was no sign of intrusion, no hint that anyone had forced their way in. Whoever had been involved in this tragedy had not been an outsider. They had been trusted. They had been allowed in, and now the Reiner family was facing the devastating consequences of that trust. This was no random act of violence. It was something far more personal, far more intimate. The investigation was just beginning, but it was already clear. This was a tragedy that would shatter the Reiner family forever. Everything about the scene seemed eerily controlled, as if nothing had been left to chance. The house, once a symbol of safety and warmth, now felt cold and methodical. There was no mess, no signs of a violent struggle, nothing to suggest a chaotic, desperate fight had taken place. Instead, there was just a quiet, deliberate movement throughout the space. It was the kind of movement that suggested the person responsible knew the house intimately. This wasn't a random break-in. Whoever had done this was familiar with the surroundings, perhaps even familiar with the people inside. They knew where everything was, how the house functioned, and most chilling of all, they knew how to move through it without leaving a trace of disorder. This revelation pointed to one unsettling conclusion. The attacker wasn't an outsider. They had been inside before, maybe even invited in. It was someone trusted, someone who knew the family intimately. And that knowledge of the space of the home seemed to make the crime even more disturbing, As detectives began to piece together the timeline of events, their attention quickly turned to Nick. According to police records, Nick had left the house shortly after the tragic incident occurred. Around 4 a.m., he checked into the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica, which seemed like an ordinary, unremarkable action at first. Hotel staff later reported that Nick appeared completely normal, calm, composed, and without any signs of distress. He checked in without hesitation, walked through the hotel lobby with an air of quiet control, and displayed none of the panic or confusion one would expect from someone involved in such a tragedy. To anyone observing him, he seemed like just another guest at a hotel, going about his business without a care in the world. However, when police later searched his hotel room, the discovery they made sent a chill down their spines. Evidence found inside the room directly linked Nick to the horrific events at the Reiner home. This evidence placed him firmly at the center of the investigation, connecting him inextricably to the tragedy. The calmness with which Nick moved through his night, the normalcy of his actions, suddenly seemed out of place, and investigators began to realize just how methodical and composed he had been, in a way that was too controlled for comfort. Nick didn't seem rushed or agitated at all. In fact, he seemed almost too calm, as if he were trying desperately to keep everything under control, to keep the storm brewing inside from spilling out. His composure was unsettling. By 9:15 p.m. on December 14th, police had tracked him down near Exposition Park, just a stone's throw away from the University of Southern California campus. The arrest was swift and efficient, almost clinical in its execution. There was no struggle, no dramatic confrontation, just the quiet sound of handcuffs snapping shut. Nick followed every instruction, silent and subdued, as officers took him into custody without resistance. As the night drew to a close, investigators had already begun to piece together the disturbing chain of events. A heated argument that exploded in front of friends and family, a quiet house soon after, a quick and unsettling disappearance, and a strange trail leading from Brentwood to Santa Monica. They were now standing at the edge of a shocking revelation, the kind of conclusion that would continue to unfold with each passing hour. Forensic teams soon moved in, their work methodical and intense. Every room, every surface, every single detail was carefully examined under a microscope. They weren't just searching for answers. They were trying to uncover the truth behind those quiet hours in the Reiner home, the ones when no one knew the darkness that was unfolding behind closed doors. They were trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly, and how the violence that had erupted had been allowed to happen in a space that should have been sacred. The medical examiner's findings were chilling. Both Rob and Michelle had passed away in the early morning hours, nearly 12 hours before they were discovered by their daughter, Romy. This matched the timeline detectives had already suspected, and the realization set in. The tragedy had happened during the quietest stretch of the night, when the neighborhood was asleep and unaware of what was unfolding behind the Reiner's doors. The injuries themselves were even more chilling. Forensic specialists identified multiple sharp force injuries inflicted from close range. This wasn't a random, accidental incident. No, these wounds had been inflicted face to face, close enough to see the victim's eyes, close enough to feel their last moments. The attacker had been right there, up close, ensuring that each strike had its intended effect. The violence wasn't a sudden outburst. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment explosion of rage. It was sustained, deliberate, a repeated effort that shocked even the most seasoned forensic experts. This wasn't a crime of passion that burned bright and fast, only to fizzle out. No, this was cold, calculated, and planned. It wasn't about a momentary loss of control. It was about intent, a decision to continue rather than stop. To make sure it was done, to make sure they succeeded in their goal, Nick Reiner was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree homicide, one for each of his parents. This charge was the most serious one, reserved for cases where the action was deliberate and planned. But the charges didn't stop there. The case was elevated by special circumstances due to the involvement of multiple victims. This pushed the case into the highest legal tier, setting the stage for what would become a fierce and lengthy legal battle. This was no ordinary case. It wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a deeply personal betrayal, one that would be fought in the courtroom for months, maybe years. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, and every legal argument would be scrutinized. And with every passing day, the weight of the situation would grow heavier as more details emerged, leading to more questions. Why did this happen? What had gone wrong? And how far would the Reiner family have to go to confront the truth? Nick's legal battle had only just begun. If convicted, the consequences would be dire. He could face life behind bars without the possibility of parole, or in the most extreme scenario, the death penalty, depending on how the court chose to proceed. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the weight of the charges loomed over him like a dark cloud, casting a long shadow over his future. The first time Nick appeared in court, the gravity of the situation was undeniable. The courtroom was steeped in a suffocating silence, heavy with the tension that came with the magnitude of the charges he was facing. As he walked into the courtroom, escorted by officers, the reality of what he had done seemed to settle over the room. He stood before the judge, and every eye was on him, but it was the subtle way his presence filled the space that spoke volumes. His defense attorney, Alan Jackson, stood beside him, a man with decades of experience handling high-profile cases, but even his reputation couldn't change the fact that the case at hand was unlike anything he had dealt with before. This wasn't going to be a short-term battle. No, this was a long, drawn-out war, one that would test every legal tactic, every strategy. A fight that would demand everything from both sides, and in this case, the outcome wasn't certain. Outside the courtroom, the air was thick with questions. One question in particular began to hang heavily in the public's mind. Who was funding Nick's defense? With no known career or visible source of income, how could someone afford the costs of such a massive legal battle? The answer remained unclear, and the lack of transparency only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. Whispers spread through legal circles, and speculations ran wild. Was it family money? Could funds from the Reiner family estate be footing the bill? The uncertainty added another layer of intrigue to a story already filled with unanswered questions. Inside the Reiner family, however, the situation was far from settled. While many were focused on the criminal charges and the pursuit of justice, some family members turned their attention to something else: Nick's mental health. They believed that, in addition to facing the legal consequences, Nick needed real treatment for the struggles that had been with him for so many years. This case wasn't just about holding him accountable for his actions. It was also about trying to address the deeper issues that had plagued him for much of his life. It became clear that, while justice had to be pursued, the lines between criminal responsibility, family responsibility, and the need for mental health care were incredibly blurred. What role did love and guilt play in the unfolding tragedy? Nick had, at one point, openly spoken about the emotional distance he felt from his father, Rob. Despite Rob's unwavering love, commitment, and constant presence, Nick had always felt like an outsider in his own family. Rob had tried everything. He was a present father, involved, caring, giving everything he had to ensure his children were supported. But for Nick, that support had never been enough to bridge the emotional gap. It wasn't that Rob had failed him. It was that Nick had struggled to connect, to fit in, to find his place within the family. The emotional distance that Nick felt defined his sense of self and shaped his identity. And as the years passed, that distance only seemed to grow. Over the years, Rob and Michelle had poured their hearts into trying to help Nick. They enrolled him in treatment programs, gave him second chances, and supported him unconditionally, offering their love even when it seemed like it was slipping through their fingers. But despite their efforts, the cycle of struggle continued. Progress was always met with setbacks, and every bit of hope was followed by more disappointment. The family was caught in a painful loop of love, guilt, and frustration. It was a long, drawn-out process of trying to fix something that seemed unfixable. They tried everything they could, but the pain of watching Nick struggle took its toll. By the time the Christmas party rolled around, the years of unresolved tension had built up to a breaking point. The argument between Rob and Nick wasn't just a random incident. It was the culmination of years of unresolved issues, of trying and failing to bridge the gap between father and son. It was a moment years in the making, a moment where the years of frustration and emotional distance came rushing to the surface in an eruption of anger, hurt, and pain. The family's struggle wasn't just about the present. It was about the years of trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the Reiner family released a joint statement, asking for privacy and space to grieve. The statement was not focused on the legal battle, but instead, it spoke only of their grief, shock, and love for the parents they had lost. They requested no interviews, no public appearances, just a private memorial, a moment of remembrance without cameras, without spectacle, just an opportunity for quiet reflection. They wanted to honor the memory of their parents without the intrusion of the media, to mourn in peace, and to process the pain that had been thrust upon them. Now, as the case moves forward, the question remains: what truly happened inside that house? Was Nick Reiner truly responsible for the deaths of his parents, or is there more to this story than meets the eye? The answers aren't clear, and as the case continues to unfold, we are left to wonder. What really happened behind those closed doors that night? Was it an act of violence born from years of unresolved pain, or something darker, more calculated? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown insightful, like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into major Hollywood cases. If you think you know the truth, or if you have your own theories about what went down that night, drop your thoughts in the comments below. This case is still developing, and every piece of new information feels like a revelation waiting to be uncovered. If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more in-depth analyses of major Hollywood cases. We're diving deep into the details no one else is talking about, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay tuned.